And I'm excited to get to my wrap up because I had a very good January. Every book was at least a 4.5 or better. This is grief horror. Let's be very clear. When we talk about grief horror or why Beloved gets put in horror, it's because this is grief horror. Because I was so frustrated with these characters. Hey y'all, and welcome back to another video of My Bookish Life with Kelssweetie. Today, we're discussing my January wrap-up. I was planning on giving y'all a Black book recommendations video early on in the month, but I decided y'all need those recommendations maybe later on in the month because you're getting plenty right now from my Instagram, from past videos that I've done. There's tons. So to be honest, I'm still trying to workshop what it is that I'm going to do for that video. And I'm excited to get to my wrap up because I had a very good January. I ended up reading 6 books, which I'm happy about because, to be completely honest with you, and I spoke a little bit about this during my Patreon wrap up message, exclusive, I'm still figuring out workshopping it. I think that will be my Sweet Nothings audio message that'll be wrapping up everything that I was in love with or thinking about during January or during the month. But I discussed it during that message that I'm surprised that I got through 6 books this last January because I didn't read for 2 weeks. For the first 2 weeks into the month, I was not reading. I had family visiting. I had tons of work, like all of that let's circle back last year talk. Yeah, well, it was real tough when we came back to it in the new year. So there was just no time for me whatsoever to listen to any audiobooks, to read any physical books whatsoever. And so for the first 2 weeks, I didn't read anything. So I'm very, very surprised that I even got through 6 books in the first place. But also last year, I was constantly surprising myself that I was even getting through 5 to 6 books on average every month. That was a huge feat for me, and starting off the year that strong, I did not think that was going to happen. One, I was not trying to think, okay, have expectations. I'm going to get 6 books done every month this year. Even though I set my goal at 75 books, it wasn't like, oh, and now you need to push yourself. It was just kind of like, well, whatever comes naturally, you do it naturally. Like it happened last year. So I'm shocked. The other thing I'm shocked about, every book was at least a 4.5 or better. There were no 3s even this last month. There were no lows. There were no DNFs whatsoever. It was a solid month of reading, which is also why I think I blew through 6 books in 2 weeks, which is far faster than I usually ever read. I'm so far for February, I'm doing well. I'm feeling good. We'll see if I keep it up. It would be amazing because the TBR that I shared with y'all for February really was, I kind of lied. Because it was twice that length now because of how many books I was like, oh, I want to read this too. I want to read this too. I don't want to make decisions. Next month is March. If some of these like femme authors during this time get rolled over into March, I'm not going to be mad at it. So let's get into the actual wrap up for January. First, I got into Beloved by Toni Morrison. Now, Beloved has been on my TBR for years now. I've had this copy of Beloved, which I knew that I didn't want. I've talked in length about how I felt about those reprints that they did before, and I'm very happy at the ones I'm seeing now. But I knew that I wanted a first edition type of copy of Beloved, of Toni Morrison's work, because I love how these books look from the 90s, from the 80s that were put out. They were gorgeous, in my opinion. This is simple, but it's lovely. It's very lovely. You got that beautiful picture on the back of it. I personally love this edition. It's not doing a lot. It's been on my bookshelf for years. Why? Because I've been honestly too afraid to read it. I've talked in length, and I talked a bit in my last readathon video when I'm discussing these conversations of what is horror. For me, the most horrific horror isn't even really gore, it's historical fiction in regards to any sort of antebellum South, any sort of slave era whatsoever. It's hard because that's real. The story itself may be based on a fictional character, but the situations that they are dealing with are absolutely real. They are not exaggerated whatsoever, and that's really hard for me to read through. It's just hard. This year, I read through a lot of classics, so I don't know what my threshold is. I don't know if that's a sign of the current times we are currently in and what I am dealing with on an everyday basis or what. But for some reason, I finally read Beloved. It was a 4 for me. I don't think it was a solid 5 because not necessarily the plot. I think this conversation of Setha and what she did in order to try and, in her mind, protect her child from going into something worse than death, which was slavery, was a very difficult one to deal with. And even everyone who is in this book has a very difficult time on different parts of the spectrum on how they feel about what she did in regards to Beloved, who comes back as a grown woman ghost-like figure who is like a sister to Denver. What's surprising is that while this book is named Beloved, the main character in this book is Denver. And that is the daughter who survived of Setha's. You know, Setha had other children. They left because of the haunting that was happening at 143 and the experiences that were happening in that house and the depression and grief. This is grief horror. Let's be very clear. When we talk about grief horror or why Beloved gets put in horror, it's because this is grief horror. And near the end of the book, especially, where Setha becomes consumed by Beloved, and they both hate each other because of being in this stalemate of her just wanting to apologize for what she did to Beloved, but also have this moment that she wasn't going to get with her before, and Beloved being resentful to Setha for doing what she did. They cannibalize each other in a lot of different ways. And Denver is like, I'm trying to protect y'all, but I gotta protect myself. And I think that these are early conversations of something that I don't think, especially in the Black community, is talked about a lot, which is I need to protect myself before I can try and protect you. I have to no matter how much I love you, I have to take myself out of a bad situation. And Denver finds herself in that situation at the end of this book. And throughout the book, I think Denver is a slept-on character. People do not talk about my girl Denver enough when discussing Beloved whatsoever. I think Setha is a very nuanced character, especially as a mama. You learn so much of her backstory, and it's talked about in a way that's not like she's just the matriarch of this household. She's talked about in very real terms, which I think when we look at our elders, we forget that they were once youthful, that they once were young, that they were once making decisions that maybe weren't the best or weren't as thought out or just they weren't looking as far ahead as they probably could have. And I think that what Beloved does really well, and what Toni Morrison, what I've learned, because I read 2 Toni Morrisons this month, which is crazy for me, she humanizes our elders. She humanizes our mothers. She humanizes, our fathers. She makes these people who are extremely fallible, who you are yelling at, you're making bad decisions, I hate this. You're sitting there and you're going, but you're human. And none of us make good decisions. None of us are supposed to make the good decisions. And especially our elders who didn't have foresight of what the future was. They weren't going to make spot-on decisions. That wasn't what they were living in. They were living day-to-day survival. And I think now, having read Beloved and Sula, which I'll talk about in just a second, I'm sitting here and I'm sitting with my feelings in regards to Jazz, which I started reading, which I read like 2 years ago now. And I remember hating it because I hated all the women. I hated all the people in that book because they were making horrible decisions, all for this man. And while I still have frustrations in regards to that, I now realize what Toni Morrison is doing in her books. And what she's doing is something that I actually love Rivers Solomon for, which is making characters who are horrible at making decisions, who are fallible, who make mistakes, who are not perfect in any means of the word, really making them human. And in that being fallible, having these mistakes, they feel absolutely human. They don't feel made up. And that is something about Beloved. You're reading Beloved and you have to remember that while the whole story is based on history that is extremely real, that many of our ancestors lived, these characters are fictional. This is not a nonfiction book. And I think that that's the amazingness of Toni Morrison. Now, I will say, she does still get a little too purple prose for me. Beloved, not as bad as Jazz was. And especially not as hard as Tar Baby was. Tar Baby, I still have not been able to get, I got through maybe 15%, and I still have it on my shelves because I'm waiting for the day where maybe I'll spin the block on it. This year, it may be possible because now I kind of feel like I understand Toni Morrison's writing a little bit better and the language that she speaks in, so I think that I can maybe try it again. I do think I'm getting used to how she writes. It is still very purple prose, very descriptive for me, who's like, I just want a straightforward answer. But I am finding the beauty that everybody else has found in it. It took me some tries, but I'm finally getting. Again, this is a solid 4. And honestly, it could even be a 4.5 in some ways. I think that the only reason why I'm not giving it a higher rating is because I found the middle portion of it a bit meandering. But again, that has to do with me having a little bit of issue of being really, really descriptive. And in the middle of the book, like the middle portion, you kind of start to get lost in the sauce a bit between, it's not a linear narrative whatsoever. So you're hearing more about Setha getting to Ohio, which that's another thing too. I love that Toni Morrison's work gets put into the Black Southern Gothic trope quite often because of how it feels. But she's from Ohio, and all of her stories mainly have to do with the Midwest and the southern part of the Midwest, which I think is beautiful because unless you've been to the southern portion of Ohio, you do not realize how connected we are to our Kentucky cousins. We are just over a bridge. If you're in Cincinnati, you just literally go over that bridge and you're in Kentucky, and it is very clear. The Midwest is a very gussied up South in a lot of ways because the migration from the South was up into Ohio. So there is so much influence from the South in the Midwest. I mean, especially in Ohio. And I think that that is why Toni Morrison's work gets put in the Black Southern Gothic genre so often, even though it's technically Black Midwestern Gothic. And I think that that's something that I would love to see experienced a bit more, and maybe even myself doing some more research. We don't have a lot of books that have to do with Ohio. For instance, on the Savage side, which I've mentioned so many times, and I wish that I would have, November was such a great reading month for me, but Chillicothe, which is discussed in the Savage side, again, it's not Black Midwestern Gothic, but it is Midwestern Gothic for sure. And it's this eeriness, it's this feeling that you get from the South, but in a very different tone. And it's because of cousins. It's because we're so close. A lot of the politics seep into Ohio. People think that just because you're in technically a northern state, that southern sensibilities aren't within the state of Ohio, and they very, very much are. There is a reason why Ohio is a swing state. That was a lot, but that's because this book really does have many layers, and I can see myself, even in another couple years from now, if I decide to reread this book, or thinking back on the themes that are in this book, having even a different feeling towards it. Because getting to this point with the Toni Morrison for me is a big feat. It is. And I enjoyed it entirely. I think that the question of what makes horror, what is horror that we're asking this month of February, this book is definitely one of those where the traditional elements of, oh, it's a ghost and there's grief and horrific things are happening. But if you're only going towards the stereotypes of what horror is, there's many people who may go, Beloved's not a horror. But it is. It very, very, very much is when you look at grief horror. This is a great example of a Black Midwestern Gothic grief horror. Next is another book that I've been meaning to get for quite a long time. I've been meaning to finish this book. It has been on my shelves for years now, and I'm glad that I finally got around to it, and that is Octavia E. Butler's Kindred. I've talked about this multiple times, that I've tried to read this multiple times. The beginning of the book is just hard for me to kind of get my mind in. And again, historical fiction for me is hard to read. I am very happy that I ended up finally reading this though, and I ended up giving about a 4.5 to it. Honestly, I feel like it lives in the same space that Beloved does because I was so frustrated with these characters. Dana is a perfect example, and it's insane because Octavia Butler wrote this in 1979. So it's truly insane to feel like Dana is such a perfect representation of the Black educated person who is thinking that they are ahead of progress. And what I mean by that is there are many moments in this book where Dana thinks that she's smarter than her ancestors. And she gets corrected every time. And throughout the book, she gets corrected every time. Dana is a perfect representation of many of us who have read our stories of our ancestors and been frustrated because we're going, why did you decide to do that? You could have just done this. Or, oh, if I had to do that, I would have done this. And here's the thing, you wouldn't have done nothing. Because we are thankful enough that while, yes, we are still experiencing violence against our bodies, while we are still experiencing injustices every day, while we are still dealing with so much as Black people in this community, even today, what we experience is absolutely and completely different. Even though they may be cousins, even though they may be offspring of what was happening to our ancestors, it is different than anything our ancestors ever experienced. And we cannot put ourselves in a position to go, well, why didn't you? Or I would have. You don't know what you would have done. Because luckily enough, you will never have to experience what they experienced. And it's not to negate or delineate like what, or even like douse what it is that we currently are experiencing in our lifetimes, but it is to say that they are completely different. They are very different. We find strength from what they experience. We are their biggest dreams, their futures. But at the end of the day, we cannot sit there and do that. And I know that I myself have been guilty of sitting there and going, why didn't you do this? I mean, even when I was talking about Beloved, there were so many frustrating decisions that were made. But also, I can't say what I would have done in that exact situation whatsoever because I've never been in that situation. And what Octavia Butler did in this book was take that and go, let me put you there and let's see what you would do. And Dana made some bad decisions because she just thought that she was smarter. You know, she tries to run away because she's like, why would I stay here? And to herself, she ends up going, I was stupid. I was big in the britches to think that I could just, oh, I read enough history books. I could pull this off. I could run away. Come on now. And then even the situation that she finds herself in with Rufus, the son of the plantation owner. She finds herself in this weird romantic, but it's not romantic, sexual, but it's not sexual, motherly, mammy type of role with this man who she continues to think, if I teach him enough, if I show him who I am enough, it will make him not be a racist. It will make him not kill my ancestor. It will make him not, fill in the blank on being this horrible white person during the antebellum South. And again, that is something that I think a lot of us are guilty of. If I sit here and I early enough get to somebody who may in the future become a racist, I can fix them. And here's the thing is that there is portions of that is true. Yes, racism is taught, but also society teaches it. Yes, it's learned at home, but also if you are sitting here and you are going to be a part of a society that is enforcing the racism and you are not vigilant on constantly being aware of it, you will fall victim to it. And that is exactly what happens to Rufus in this book. He takes advantage of Dana, he takes advantage of her ancestor, he takes advantage of everyone with this idea that he is different, but he's no different. He is a part of the society that he is a victim of the society that he is a part of. And therefore, everyone who is around him are victims of his wrath being such. I think that that's a very complex and nuanced conversation. I found myself frustrated every time she was helping that boy out and he kept on showing her. And this is also the representation of when somebody shows you who they are, believe them. Because multiple times Rufus showed Dana who he was, and she didn't want to believe him. She just kept on thinking, well, let me just try harder. Let me try harder. And it wasn't her responsibility to try harder. This is a great representation also of when Black people are like, it is not my responsibility to try to make you a better person. And it's not. I think that that's a very nuanced conversation when people say that. Because yes, we have to start the dialogue, but it is on the person you are dialoguing with to take it a step further, to continue their research and to continue to work against the society that puts them on the other side of racism, of misogyny, of homophobia, of fill in the blank, of all of these things. But the main one who I cannot give any sort of leeway to is Dana's husband. At one point, he gets pulled in, and he's like acting like it's a Miss Frizzle magic school bus trip. Like, oh my God, the history we can see. Seatbelts, everyone! And she's looking at him like, bro, I'm a slave. You're white. Why are you acting like this is a fun trip? And honestly, throughout a majority of this book, while you find out later that, like, you know, he was helpful in the ways that he could be helpful, I don't want to give too much away, but there were moments where he was extremely helpful, where he was working, you know, against the College of Abolition and all this other stuff. It still was, you do not understand your privilege, and it is very clear, or else you wouldn't be speaking about where we are right now the way you are. And it's wild how you're speaking about it, considering what situation that puts me in. I think this was extremely nuanced. I think the characters were layered. And again, going back to what I said about Beloved, I think that it was conversations around your ancestors made mistakes, they were fallible, they weren't perfect people. Accept that, understand that they were human. And especially if you're into, and as many conversations of ancestor veneration and spirituality is going on right now within the Black community, understanding that your ancestors were not perfect is something important, because just because you are finding strength from your ancestors and asking them for guidance, they're not always going to be correct in where they're trying to guide you or what they understand. And I think that both of these books do a great job of that. Honestly, a lot of the classics that I read this last month did a lot of that. Another amazing author who I actually got obsessed with and bought her entire set of books. They're kind of scattered throughout, or else I'd have them in front of us right now. Actually, I'm probably gonna pick them up and just give me a moment. Okay, here's the reveal. I had to go and get them because I was like, oh, I need to show these off. Zora Neale Hurston. From reading this book, I read Moses, Man of the Mountain. I picked it up because I loved this cover. Honestly, that was the main reason why I picked this up. And I'm glad, and this is why I say reprint covers are so important, because that is how you interest a new group of readers to classics. I think for a very long time, classics were stuck in this very boring, straightforward kind of method of how they were being put out, in this idea of reverence of the book. But what they were doing was kind of shoving them in a very academic, buy this for school, buy this for education purposes, rather than the idea that these books were once just regular nonfiction or regular fiction books that were being sold in stores, just like you're buying any other normal book right now. And I'm so happy that it seems that the publishing industry, is really showing more attention to Black authors especially, but to classics, to classic literature, to reapproach it instead of this very academic space, approaching it how they do with any other cover, because that is what's bringing readers in to start going, maybe I should pick this up. Maybe I should read it. Maybe there is something in there. I'm somebody who did that. And that is why I ran the block on Zora Neale Hurston. Now, keep in mind, I've read Their Eyes Were Watching God 2 or 3 times, and I'm not a rereader. So that's a big thing for me. I watched Their Eyes Were Watching God, the movie, at a very impressionable age. I love that film, and because I love that film, I picked up the book. I did what I was supposed to do. However, I never went back and read Zora Neale Hurston again, and looking at her bios, looking at her catalog, and learning more about me personally right now, in a state of where looking back at my ancestors' spirituality, at hoodoo. She was a huge studier of people. She had done a lot within voodoo, and she even became a practitioner and folklore, and she was very, very forward-thinking in a lot of the ways that she thought of the Black community that her companions during the time didn't understand her on. And unfortunately, Zora Neale Hurston she did not receive her roses when she was still here whatsoever. It is very, very sad. And we can all thank Alice Walker for doing the work of bringing her back to the forefront, and why she's talked about amongst Toni Morrison and Audre Lorde and all of the greats now, because she did the work of finding it and putting it back out there. All that being said, I read Moses, Man of the Mountain, and it blew me away so much that I became obsessed, and I said, I got to get everything she's ever put out. And I was lucky enough, and this is where I know that a lot of conversation has been happening around, my last reorg video where I was unhauling these books. And I have to tell y'all, for me, it's a discount. I utilize my library, y'all. I swear I do. I'm constantly listening to audiobooks on Libby. I'm constantly checking out books, ebooks from my library. Do not get me wrong. I am utilizing my library. My problem is a sale or a thrift store. If I can get a book on discount, almost all the books that you see and all the books I was getting rid of and all the books behind me, almost nearly every single one of these, I did not get them for full price. That is because I'm a Maxtinista. And that is why I found on eBay that, Harper Perennial put out a box set of basically all of Zora Neale Hurston's published works. Not all of them. I have Their Eyes Are Watching God already, so I wasn't really pressed on the fact that it wasn't included in this box set. And I loved this copy of Moses, Man of the Mountain so much that there is a copy that goes with this set. I'm going to be selling it. Actually, it's already on my Pango if you want to check that out, even though it doesn't go with this cute box set, just because this copy is amazing. But I'm saying, I went on eBay. I said, Zora Neale Hurston, what can I get? Because as y'all know, I love a classic, especially for Black classics. A lot of those books look amazing in their first publishings. And I found this box set, $30. I got all of these, plus the one that I told you that was Man on the Mountain in this box set for $30. Now, I have no clue why they were selling it for so low. I don't know if they didn't know the value of it. I do know that there was a mark on nearly every single one of these books, like a crayon mark. A little bit of game for you. Just get yourself a magic eraser, and for any damaged books that you usually will see, you can scrub that out with a magic eraser. If it is a gloss or a matte finish on your book, you can get rid of that. I'm telling you that because unfortunately places like Barnes & Noble or Target, they do this thing where if something's even slightly damaged, they can't put it out on the floor, and so they'll mark it up more and then throw them out or sell them like on a pallet or something. I think that it's horrible. I think it's wasteful, but it was my come up. Luckily, they all look brand new because I just pulled out on a magic eraser, and now they look fine, look completely fine. So now I have Mulebone, A Comedy of Negro Life. Zora Neale Hurston wrote this with Langston Hughes, and actually it kind of ruined their relationship for a long time, and because they didn't want to come to terms with who actually was the author of Mulebone, this comedy. In the end, they ended up actually coming back together and writing it, but it did ruin their relationship for some time. Also, Seraph on the Swanee as well. A lot of these are folktale and like study of like, Black life. I love that about Zora Neale Hurston's work, is that it feels like it's really speaking to the beliefs that Black people have had and the folklore that Black people have had, and putting context to it as well. Jonas Gourdvine, and complete short stories that she had released. A lot of these were articles because Zora Neale Hurston wrote for many different magazines, which I think is amazing, because I think that sometimes we sit there and we go, for instance, I have a zine, and writing articles for that, you wonder, okay, what does this mean? Is it important? And yes, it's very important. Some articles have as much lasting value as some full novels. And then I also have Tell My Horse, Voodoo and Life in Haiti and Jamaica, which is full of her experience of going to Haiti and Jamaica and being a practitioner of voodoo and hoodoo. And finally, Mules and Man, which is about folklore. It's a collection of folklore. From being from Florida, she is the daughter of a preacher, and I think that crossover of spirituality and how much insight she has not only helped her write books like these, but especially helped her write Moses, Man of the Mountain. I wasn't sure what I was getting into when I first picked up this book, but the foreword was amazing because it was talking about how Moses shows up in so many different beliefs and religions, not just simply Christianity. I think that's where we know him most, but he shows up in so many different beliefs. And asking the question of why is that? Why is Moses such an important figure for so many different beliefs and so many different backgrounds? And this book reimagines the story of Moses through the eyes of hoodoo and Black slavery. I found this moving, especially in the beginning chapters, hearing about the treatment of Hebrews in Egypt and a lot of the things that were discussed that feel very relevant to what we are dealing with today. Keep in mind, again, Zora Neale Hurston released this originally published in 1939. 1939. The conversations and even the story of Moses, which is how many centuries old. We are still walking through the same storyline. We are doing the same thing. We've just changed the names. It's both infuriating and sad, but this is what I mean when I've said this multiple times on my Instagram and social media. It is disheartening going through what we are currently going through, but we are not the first to go through it. The conversation of this is not my America. I don't know how we got here. We have always been here. This is not the first time we've been here. Read the playbook. Read our ancestors' work. Learn what they learned. Do it better. Do it quicker and do it better, because we have evidence of it. This is why they are trying so hard to get rid of libraries, why they're trying to erase monuments. They're trying to get rid of all of their book burning. They're getting rid of all of this different information because they don't want us to realize you have been through this before and you've won. This book is the amalgamation of that conversation. It humanizes. It humanizes our ancestors. It humanizes somebody like Moses, who I think is thought of as this conduit of God because of talking to this godly figure, talking to God themselves, but even the power that Moses held within his hands as a hoodoo practitioner in this book. But he was human. He was human, he was a man, and those who are around him were human. And those around him are representations of our ancestors in the community as a whole, which is not perfect whatsoever. I think a lot of times we get caught up in the ideas of looking across and looking at other communities and going, y'all don't have y'all stuff together, when your own house isn't clean, which is a Black proverb. So I was extremely moved by this book. I ended up giving it like a 4.5, close to a 5. And that's because it was just fantastic and far more than I thought that I would get out of this book. I do recommend it to a lot of people, especially those who may have grown up in the Bible Belt like I did, or may have a background in being raised in the church or Christianity, or watched The Prince of Egypt far too many times as a 90s child, and now are kind of finding other religions that you're interested in or spiritualities that you're interested in, especially those that are ancestral based. I think that I would definitely recommend this book, and I think that the point of this book, especially in the beginning chapters, is about revolutionary ideas through the point of view of our ancestors and through spirituality. This was amazing. It was moving. It made me obsessed with Zora Neale Hurston, and now basically I can see this being a Zora Neale Hurston year for me, for sure. Even for this upcoming month, I'm going to be reading Mules and Men, and I'm also going to be slowly working my way through Tell My Horse, and I'm hoping that the rest of the books that I have, I can slowly fit them into my TBRs throughout the rest of the year, because I'm obsessed. I'm truly, truly obsessed. Another classic. After reading that one, I did end up pulling out a short one, but one that I've been meaning to get to for a very, very long time, and that was Animal Farm by George Orwell. I have, of course, heard this many times. Like, you need to read this, you need to read this. I've heard so many people say that it's amazing, and I've had it on my bookshelf for forever. The audiobook for this is literally only 3 hours, so I listened to it while cleaning the house one day. It deserves its roses. Don't get me wrong whatsoever. I ended up giving it around a 4 because, of course, it's still relevant, unfortunately, as we see today, and I think the metaphors were out of this world and far beyond its time. I absolutely understand why something like this was written and seen like as mind-blowing. It really was moving, and I think it was very interesting. I will say that I do see that this is Orwell was British. He was European. I think he was British, and you can tell that a lot of the conversations in here are very Britain worldview based. It does not negate from the conversations happening as far as Animal Farm is concerned, because I do think that it's clear that you can kind of fill in any ism, any atrocity, or anything like that into the dialogue of what's happening on Animal Farm. But I will say that I don't think I think the purpose of this book is not necessarily to have any answers. It's more so the fact that some people are far too close to these conversations, and they get lost in the nuances of being human and this, that, and the third. And what Orwell did in this book was, okay, let me remove the context of humans and history out of the context and simply put these same issues to a group of animals on a farm. And they're the exact same issues. They're just animals. And I think it's interesting how many people talk about this book and how revolutionary it may seem and this, that, and the third, but then will struggle or stumble through conversations happening right now in regards to treatment of immigrants, treatment of Black folks, treatment of people of color, treatment of queer folks, treatment of fill in the blank on the atrocities happening to all of us right now, especially here in America. But you can make the connections in this book about animals. And I think that was Orwell's point, is that some of y'all are far too close to the conversation and you're not seeing it for what it is, because you're sitting here making excuses for other people. You're sitting here making excuses for yourself when you're not the snowball in this situation. You're the, what was his name? You're the Napoleon. Yeah, it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I enjoyed this, but I see the hype. I mean, again, this was published in what year? It was originally published, copyright 1946. I think that that's one thing that's going to be a throw line for the rest of the year, and I knew this going even into the year. Looking back at classics, looking back at ancestors' work, looking back at the writing and what was happening during this time, and seeing the similarities to exactly what we're doing right now. We are just repeating history. Per usual. We're just not, we find ourselves sitting here going, this is something new, and it's not. We just aren't reading the classics because they're not having us pick them up. They're not sitting here and repackaging them so that we're like, oh, let me pick that up. I am glad that I finally got to this, though, for sure. Another Toni Morrison that has been on my TBR for quite some time because I found it at the thrift store was Sula. And I've had so many people when I've told them, oh, I'm not usually a Toni Morrison fan because she's just a little too descriptive for me, a little too talky for me. A lot of people say, pick up Sula. I think that you'll love Sula. And I definitely understand it now. This received a solid 4.5, nearly 5 stars for me. I think that this is the least decorative language I've heard Toni Morrison speak in. And I appreciated that. It felt very much like I can approach the conversation. I'm not getting lost in a bunch of different descriptions. I'm not getting lost in the beautiful, writing. The writing is beautiful, but it's straightforward. And I personally appreciated that. I also appreciated, again, the conversation of fallible and very frustrating characters. All of the characters in this book are frustrating in a lot of ways. Some of them are just plain old evil. And it's not necessarily that there is a hero of the story whatsoever. Even Sula, she is not a hero. She has issues. Her best friend has issues. Her mother had issues. There are so many, everybody in here has issues, their own set. And I found that was understanding and real to me, rather than feeling like, oh, I'm so annoyed that none of these characters seem real because they have so many issues. Instead, I felt like they were extremely real because of it. And reading this made me kind of think back to Beloved, and now I feel softer in my reviews of Toni Morrison's work because I'm realizing now what she's trying to do with her characters. I'm realizing now why people love her characters so much, because you're frustrated with them, because they are realistic. They're not perfect whatsoever. And Sula, they are definitely not perfect. We have mothers are setting their sons who are gripped by the hand of drugs. And there's prostitution all over the place in this book. Friends are sleeping with husbands' friends, and it is drama. This is drama. If they were to try and remake Sula for a modern generation, the drama would be unmatched, completely unmatched. There's a child death in here, and you're just like, why did you do that? It's crazy. It's amazing. I think that, though, for me, the end portions of this book are what were most eye-opening for me, because after all this conversation of what was happening in this community, which again, the conversation had to do with the fact that these people were not perfect. We did not have our stuff together as a community, and we were so worried about what was happening in somebody else's house instead of making sure our own house was clean. And that's not to be derogatory, it's to be real. This was great, and I think that this is the book that truly changed the tide on how I felt about Toni Morrison's work, for sure. I have some more Toni. I have The Bluest Eye, and I read Song of Solomon when I was in high school, but I may have to spin the block on it again now being older and realizing a lot more about what it was talking about. But for the most part, a lot of these books, I find them at the thrift store, and because people read them in their AP classes, that's good for me. And like I said, I love a discount. The last book of the month was one that I wasn't expecting to read for January. It technically was for February's readathon, but the audiobook was starting to my Libby hold on it was coming up, and somebody else was waiting for it, so I wasn't going to be able to renew it. So I ended up just plowing through and reading it, and I'm so glad that I did. It was a 5-star, which should be no shock to anyone. That was Victor LaValle's The Changeling. I am such a Victor LaValle fan. I am so upset that I waited so long to read his work, but his work is the perfect example of speculative fiction. It is so many different genres and so many different messages and plot lines and experimentation, and the writing is straightforward while still being impactful. I love Victor LaValle. I absolutely love Victor LaValle, and that's saying a lot because I'm going to be honest with you. As we know, I'm more of a fan of femme writers around here rather than male. And a male writer has to truly, truly impress me in order for me to sing their praises. And Victor LaValle has absolutely done that. I'm slowly working my way through his back catalog, but I have yet to find something that I went, that was kind of so-so. Even Big Machine, when I finished it, I think that I was a little like, that was good, but I don't know if I get it yet. And the longer I sit with it, the more that I think about it, the more that I realize how much that book was saying, and I'm just impressed by it again. I'm so happy that I finally picked this up. I know that this is one of his more famous pieces, especially around this time of year when we start talking about Black horror, and absolutely worth its salt. It's worth all of its accolades. I found that it was extremely, extremely interesting, and I found that I was moving through a lot of it looking at conversations of fatherhood and fears of men becoming fathers, especially Black men. The combination of many different backgrounds and traditions, postpartum depression from women, women not being heard, especially women of color not being heard when they are in pain or depressed or having issues with their child. What is the responsibility of a mother as opposed to the responsibility of a father? There's so many different things that were being brought up in here. Politics in regards to, of course, Black bodies in the police, and also classism. You know, New York, this is a very New York book. Very, very New York book. You can tell Victor LaValle is from New York. He lives in New York. That is definitely being talked about in this book. Surveillance, technology. This book is so... I think that is an underlying thing about this book. You pick it up in regards to these conversations of postpartum depression. And then you end up finding out that more so, a lot of this has to do with the fact of technology, as I'm talking to you, being like the biggest thing that we need to be afraid of. The biggest thing in regards to our safety. How people can come into our literal homes and snatch us up or just create havoc because they have access to these computers and these phones that we are looking at 24/7. That was an amazing part of this book that I wasn't expecting. It was absolutely amazing. I will be honest though, I've read three Victor LaValle's: Big Machine, The Devil in Silver, and The Changeling. This is the third. Out of those three, I'm ranking this at 3. Not because it was bad, because again, all of those are 5 stars for me. Or like they're 4 and some change, which is like at that point negligible. The only reason I think that I have it at a 3 is because I feel like some of the points that were being brought up in the story, while being brought up in a brand new, fresh way, were points that I'd already heard before, because I read a ton of postpartum depression type of horror. I think the technology conversation was something new that I was really appreciative of, and of course, like, these characters are amazing, but I feel like Big Machine and A Devil in Silver brought brand new topics to the conversation, and I think all 3 of them do that. I think that it's just me personally. I wanted it to be even more weird, and this is weird, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely weird. Especially nearing the end, it gets out of this world. It is absolutely speculative fiction. I had an amazing time reading this, and I get why it's constantly being recommended. Like, this portion was really, really moving for me personally and what I'm dealing with in my own life, and that is, your father had a terrible childhood. His mother and father were awful people. He wanted a family so badly. He wanted to make up for everything he'd missed. He'd been telling himself stories about how it would be since he was 12 years old. But 12-year-olds don't understand adulthood. Even when he became a man, he still thought like a child. He couldn't change, couldn't adapt. I served him with divorce papers, but he had other plans. Your father lived in terror that he'd lose you. That's what the whole book is about. When he was young, he didn't have an Ida who would come save him. He always felt like the goblins had stolen him and raised him, and no one came to bring him back. That's why he had it, why he wanted to read it to you. He was always going to come for you. He loved you with all his heart, and he tried to take your life. I'm sorry, Apollo, but both of those things are true. And I thought that that was so moving because it really spoke of how a lot of men and women, parents, period, especially if they didn't have good childhoods or they had complicated relationships with their parents, are constantly trying not to do the same thing with their kids. But if they are not taking a moment to step back and realize what they are actually doing instead of just putting this preemptive ideas and expectations on what parenthood should be, they will absolutely ruin their own relationships. And not only that, but when something is thrown in that they are not prepared to handle, they completely will lose it. And that is what happened to Apollo's father in this book. I thought that that was an amazing portion. And again, nuance. Victor Laval is the one for nuance and layered characters for sure. Me putting it third in my list of Victor Laval's is really nothing because they're all 5 stars. I recommend all of them heavily. Honestly, this one is talked about so much, and by all means, it should be, but more people need to be reading also Devil in Silver, as well as Big Machine, as well as, you know, so many people are now picking up Lone Women, and so that's definitely one that's talked about a lot, but he's so many books, and all of them for me personally have been huge 5 stars. Lone Woman is probably going to be the next Victor Laval that I read, but we'll see. He has other books other than those top 4. So we'll get to it eventually, but I'm so glad that I got to this in January and I didn't let my audiobook run out. That is my wrap up for January. As y'all saw, I read a lot of classics. They really grounded me. And I think that I've been somebody who has never been necessarily a classic literature type of reader, even though I read a lot of back catalog, even though I don't necessarily have an aversion to it. I think that it's just, historical fiction. And I think that, I'm in a space right now where I'm ready for a lot of that dialogue and that conversation. But at the same time, there's always new books that are being released. And being somebody who's a cover first type of reader, it's honestly, sometimes I haven't picked up these books. But I am glad that I am slowly chipping away at them because I have found a lot of amazing messaging, a lot of grounding messaging in these books, a lot of understanding in regards to my ancestors, in regards to knowing where they were at and knowing what they had to do, and survivalism. There's so much that I got from all the books this last month, and that's why they were so highly rated, and I just had an amazing time reading this last month. I've already started my reading for February, obviously. I'm currently reading Cursed Daughters. I'm having a great time. We will see how many books I get through, though. I am nervous because I have a very long list of running books on my Libby, on my physical reads. It is a lot. Like I'm a little overwhelmed, but I am excited. I'm feeling a lot of energy in regards to my reading right now, and I hope that I can keep up the pace. I'm hoping I can keep up the pace because there's so many books I want to get to, and so I don't know. It just feels like it's always so little time. I can only fit in reading. Thank y'all so much for watching today's video. Again, it was a long wrap up per usual as we do around here. I love getting into the nitty gritty of talking about these messages and these stories with y'all. And I'm glad to hear that y'all enjoy them as well. If you like today's video, please make sure that you subscribe down below for more lengthy video wrap-ups. But also, I have, like I said earlier in the video, I have some Black horror recommendations coming up soon. And with Valentine's Day around the corner, I'm thinking of doing like a love horror type of recommendations video coming up as well. We will see, but also check out my Patreon if you want to see any more creative videos or behind the scenes videos or other things that I'm obsessed with. That is all over on my Patreon, so make sure to check that out. And check out my Pango because I do have a good amount of they're really good books. I just didn't resonate with them, but I'm trying to push that out there, that I have those up there because I do want to get them out of this house so I can make some room. But thanks again, y'all, for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see y'all in the next one. Bye.